What if the history you memorized in school was built on myths, hoaxes, and fake facts in history? From the Great Wall of China supposedly visible from the moon, to the idea that diamonds are rare, to viral history myths like lemmings committing mass suicide. Some of the most famous stories are actually historical misconceptions. This video will uncover the weird history facts and history lies that textbooks, media, and even Hollywood turned into truth. Get ready for debunked history that will make you question everything you thought you knew. 1. The Titanic was unsinkable, and maybe it was all a setup. You've heard this one 1,000 times. The ship that God himself could not scuff, a boast hammered into the hull like a curse. The company never used that word in their brochures. They used careful phrases like practically unsinkable, the kind of legal poetry that keeps lawyers smiling. The pure, unsinkable headline came later because newspapers understand irony, like sharks understand blood. Then the conspiracy suite checked in and ordered room service. They say the ship was switched with her older sister for insurance, that shadowy moguls pulled strings, that it was all a ritual in a tuxedo. Here is what the evidence says when you stop playing Clue on an iceberg. Investigations on both sides of the Atlantic found a blunt chain of normal human errors stacked on top of design choices that looked smart until ice said hello. Speed in icy waters, warnings ignored because the radio room was busy with passenger traffic, no binoculars in the crow's nest because a key never made the voyage, rivets that were fine for a warm shipyard but brittle when a North Atlantic night flexed its muscles, bulkheads that stopped short of the deck that would have saved the day. There was no credible proof of a switch, no footage of a mastermind, just a tragedy built from habits that felt safe until they were not. The ocean did not need a conspiracy. It had physics. Think about it. If the stories you trusted in school were lies, what else in your life has been built on illusions? Stay with me, because once you see through these myths, you'll never look at history or truth the same way again. 2. Lemmings yeet themselves off cliffs. Yes, the classic. Tiny fur missiles marching toward the sea like a corporate team-building exercise gone very wrong. You know the clip? A tragic line, a sad splash, a smug narrator. Here's the part the narrator forgot. A mid-century crew wanted drama and could not find it in nature's schedule, so they manufactured it with trucks, boards, and brooms. They imported animals from far away, drove them to a river cliff, and herded them over so the camera could capture a myth with perfect lighting. Awards followed, teachers repeated it, cartoons made it cute, and a species became a punchline for mindless conformity. Real lemmings do what many small mammals do. Populations boom when food is plenty. Crowding triggers migration. Some die crossing water because cold rivers are not theme parks. There is no genetic note that reads, "Today we leap for the brand." The only herd behavior worth shaming was human. We trusted a script because the footage felt definitive. The truth is simple. Lemmings do not plan mass goodbyes. The only thing that plunged was ethics, and it left a wake as loud as the applause. 3. Only 300 Spartans stood at Thermopylae. You've heard this one 1,000 times. 300 legends, a narrow gate, a million enemies. It is the perfect gym poster and a great way to sell capes. What if I told you the missing cast list includes several thousand more Greeks who also stood in that choking heat? About 7,000 men from allied cities shared the pass, brought supplies, rotated the line, and bled. The Spartans were an elite corps, a steel spike inside a larger spear. Myth-making trimmed the roster because round numbers and doomed heroism test well with audiences who preferred drum solos to entire orchestras. The real story is fierce in a different way. It is logistics under a hammering sun. It is coalition discipline holding ground while scouts map trails and messengers sprint like lives depend on it. The loss still stung. The stand still mattered. But the headline amputated nuance and sold protein powder. If you want a miracle, try this one. A dozen city-states that could barely agree on lunch held together long enough to slow an empire. The cape is optional. The teamwork is mandatory. 4. JFK and the Impossible Bullet. What if I told you the magic in the magic bullet was never magic at all, just bad geometry and wishful filmmaking? You know the theory. One projectile could not cause that many wounds. Therefore, the grassy knoll hides a second shooter who apparently took the day off from central casting. That logic collapses the moment you put the car, the seats, and the bodies where they actually were. The jump seat sat lower and left. The governor was turned. The president leaned. Draw the lines with the real angles, and the path is plain like a chalk mark on asphalt after rain. Reconstructions track the entry and exit points cleanly when the model matches reality instead of a memory polished by 1,000 reruns. The famous acoustic analysis that promised a second gun cracked under scrutiny like a cheap prop. Did confusion flood the scene? Of course, chaos is not a conspiracy. The hardest truth to accept is the dullest. One man with a rifle and a window can change history without help from a hidden chorus. It does not hum like a thriller, but that is how the world breaks. 5. Absinthe makes you see green fairies. You have heard the whispers. The bottle glows like a traffic light for artists. One sip, and the muses crawl out from under the table. Here is the adult version without the fairy wings. The panic around this drink was less pharmacology and more market share. Wine producers were losing customers to a fashionable spirit and needed a villain with a photogenic color. Rumors bloomed. Politicians clutched pearls. Moralists held press conferences. The molecule blamed for visions exists in quantities so tiny that the alcohol overwhelms it long before your neurons try interpretive dance. The Bohemians were not communing with spirits. They were communing with the bottom of the glass, which turns ordinary ideas into revelations until morning arrives with a broom. The ban fed the legend. The legend fed the ban. And the drink kept its dangerous aura for a century, like a perfume ad with better hats. The truth is unstylish but clean. Absinthe can make you drunk, loud, and convinced your poem is a masterpiece. The only fairy here is the rumor, and it flies on money and fear, not wings. 6. The Middle Ages believed the earth was flat. You have heard the schoolroom myth that Columbus sailed to prove a point about geometry while everyone else clung to the edge of a dinner plate. The cheerline makes moderns feel clever. It also makes historians twitch. Educated Europeans had access to ancient Greek arguments for a spherical earth. Mariners watched stars slide on and off the horizon in ways only a curve allows. Scholars wrote about the size of the globe and argued over miles, not shapes. The fight over Columbus was never a battle between round and flat. It was a spreadsheet war over distance, provisions, and risk. His critics said the voyage west to Asia would be far longer than he claimed. They were right about the math and wrong about the continents conveniently parked in the middle. So where did the flat story bloom? 19th century writers polishing a narrative that cast old religion as superstition and new science as a lone hero with better shoes. It plays great in textbooks and terrible in source notes. The truth is less cinematic and more persistent. People who read the sky knew its curve. People who read the ocean trusted it. The edge of the world is a poster, not a port. 7. Cleopatra, the Siren of the Nile. You have heard the legend. A queen so gorgeous, she melted Rome like butter on hot bread. It is the cleanest way to blame geopolitics on mascara. The receipts tell a different story. Cleopatra ruled as the last of a Greek dynasty in Egypt, fluent in tongues and fluent in survival. She negotiated as if the map were a chessboard, and she owned both clocks. Coins and carved profiles show a sharp, practical face that modern casting directors would crop out of frame. Yet every time Rome needed to explain defeat, it pointed at lipstick, not logistics. Power prefers the bedtime story where men are victims of beauty rather than victims of strategy. Cleopatra built alliances with ships, grain, scribes, and charisma, weaponized into statecraft. She was dangerous because she was competent, a crime ancient propaganda punished with rumors that still sell movie tickets. The truth is sharper than eyeliner. The queen who unsettled an empire did it with brains, not braids. Rome lost a contest of planning, then wrote a romance to feel better. 8. The Great Wall is visible from the moon. You have heard this boast during field trips and on posters laminated for the ages. A human scar so bold the moon itself can see it. Cute. Wrong. The wall is long like a river but narrow like a road and built from the very earth it crosses. which makes it blend with the land unless the light strikes like a revelation. From low orbit, maybe you catch it if you know the coordinates and the humidity takes a nap. From the moon, forget it. Think of trying to spot a single hair on a sweater from the far end of a gym while someone shakes the floor and turns down the lights. Astronauts have said this for decades. The myth outlived them because it feels delicious. It lets us imagine our work echoing into space like a shout across a canyon. The math disagrees. Space is huge. Bricks are small. Pride does not change optics. The wall is a marvel, but your eyes are not magicians, and the moon is not a tourist with binoculars. 9. The Iron Maiden torture coffin. What if I told you the scariest piece in the dungeon gallery is about as medieval as a souvenir snow globe? The so-called human-shaped cabinet of spikes was assembled centuries later by showmen who understood that fear sells tickets faster than context. They bolted scrap together, lacquered it with nightmare, and fed audiences a caption that smelled of smoke and sermons. Real medieval punishment did not need stainless theatrics. Rope did the job, racks did the job, thumbscrews did the job. Public shame did the job better than any spiky closet could dream. Yet the Iron Maiden keeps standing in museums, a monument to our appetite for spectacle. It lets visitors feel brave while peeking at cruelty that did not exist, and it lets curators keep foot traffic hot in the slow season. The truth is uglier because it is ordinary. Pain was cheap, quick, and public. The spike cabinet is a selfie prop with a Latin name. If you want horror, read the court rolls. They have more blood and fewer hinges. 10. High noon duels in the Wild West. You have seen it so many times your brain can hum the tune. Two men stare. A tumbleweed panics. A clock whispers 12 like a judge. Reality would like a word. Frontier towns posted gun ordinances at the edge of town and expected visitors to hand over hardware like umbrellas in a lobby. The famous ritual draw was rare because people who want to live avoid fair fights, and people who plan crimes prefer shadows to sunlight. Violence existed by the wagon load, but it looked like ambushes, drunken brawls, backroom feuds, and night rides, not ballet on Main Street. The ritual duel marched in with dime novels, stayed for the matinee, and never left because it is the kind of scene that edits itself. Real lawmen were busy with paperwork, court dates, and storage shelves for confiscated iron. The myth wears a hat and a soundtrack. The truth wears dust and bad breath. If noon was involved, it was for lunch, not legend. 11. The cowboy was always a white Lone Ranger. Ah yes, the classic postcard of the West, a pale jawline under a wide brim riding into a sunset that was definitely color-graded. Let me ruin the postcard with facts that wear dusty boots. After the Civil War, a huge share of working cowboys were formerly enslaved men who knew horses and cattle better than any city banker with a silver buckle. Many historians estimate roughly a quarter of trail hands were black, and a great many others were Mexican vaqueros whose skills, gear, and vocabulary built the ranching culture from the reins up. Words you love are Spanish in disguise: rodeo, lasso, mustang, stampede, chaparreras trimmed in the saddle until they became chaps. Techniques like roping from horseback and managing cattle drives across brutal distances were not invented by Hollywood. They were taught on the open range by men who did not get billing. So why did the myth bleach? Dime novels needed a single hero silhouette, and early film needed a face that fit the casting rules of its time. The camera whitewashed the workforce, then syndicated the lie. The real West was multicolored, multilingual, and unionized by dust. The saddle did not care about skin, it cared about skill, and skill does not ask for a headshot. I know it hurts to realize that generations were fed these myths like gospel, but that's why this matters, because the only way to break free from the lies is to finally face the truth together. 12. Diamonds are rare, and the ring is sacred. What if I told you the rarest thing about diamonds was your patience when the bill arrives? You have heard the script since middle school. The stone is scarce. The ritual is ancient. The ring proves love like a notarized affidavit. Here is the off-camera cut. Diamonds are not uniquely scarce among gemstones. The illusion was engineered by a cartel that learned how to squeeze supply like a faucet and release just enough sparkle to keep prices high. Then came a slogan that might be the most effective spell ever cast on modern romance. Love equals diamond forever. Amen. Magazines turned it into culture. Jewelers turned it into obligation. We inherited a tradition that is younger than your grandmother's favorite recipe and far less wholesome. The truth is less cinematic and more industrial. Scarcity was curated, desire was programmed, tradition was branded until it felt biblical. If love needs proof, there are cheaper ways than buying into a geology cult with great copywriters. The only unbreakable bond here is between advertising and your expectations, and that rock is harder than carbon. 13. Illuminati still runs your Wi-Fi. What if I told you the world's favorite puppet masters could barely survive a decade without tripping over paperwork? The Bavarian Illuminati did exist. It was a small club of Enlightenment nerds who believed reason could outshine superstition and that reading lists could change lives. They recruited professors and lawyers. They argued about morality and government. They annoyed the wrong prince and got banned by a state that did not enjoy private clubs with bold opinions. Meanwhile, the eye of providence that people point to on the dollar is an older symbol about divine watchfulness that traveled through art long before your bank card existed. The Illuminati never touched it. But pop culture loves a tidy villain that can be everywhere and nowhere. Powerful enough to blame, yet vague enough to survive any disproof. So the club grew fangs in fiction, then turned into a hashtag. Real conspiracies are messy and local. They leak. They trip on logistics. A secret society that could not outmaneuver a regional police force probably is not scheduling your search results. If they are, their calendar app keeps crashing. 14. Newton was bonked into genius by an apple. You have seen the cartoon so often it plays on a loop. A young thinker sits under a tree. A fruit falls. Thunk, eureka. Please keep the apple, lose the slapstick. Newton himself later told friends he watched an apple drop and began chewing on a question that was already gnawing at him. Why down? Why not sideways? Why the same here and out there where the moon cruises and the planets wander? He carried that quiet puzzle back to his desk, like smoldering coal, and fed it with years of work until it became a furnace. Out came mathematics that still steer satellites and a book that reads like thunder, written in Latin. 15. Ancient statues were meant to be pure white. You've heard museum whispers that marble was loved naked, cold, sublime, a perfect monochrome diet for the soul. The truth wears color like a carnival. Ancient sculptors painted their gods and heroes in bold reds, blues, greens, and golds, then added details that would make a makeup artist blush. Eyes with irises and pupils, hair with shading, armor with patterns loud enough to start a parade. Time sandblasted the paint. Burials and baths stripped the bodies back to their stone bones. Renaissance artists rediscovered the ghosts and mistook absence for intention. White marble became a theology, cleanliness, restraint, purity, all the things critics love when they are projecting. 16. St. Patrick chased snakes out of Ireland. Yes, the heroic pastor versus 1,000 wriggly villains, the kind of imagery that sells parades and foam hats. It also sells a neat untruth. After the ice sheets retreated, Ireland sat as an island with a chilly moat, which snakes did not cross. The place had myths and monsters, but real reptiles were not on the guest list. Early writers used snakes the way propaganda always has, as a symbol for old beliefs that a new faith wanted to replace. So the story crawled out of metaphor and into the family album, and now everyone nods along as if a bishop did pest control with a staff. The real man did a harder job. 17. Play Mozart to your baby and watch the IQ rise. You have heard the promise, and watch the ads float across your screen like lullabies made of graphs. One sonata and bingo, gifted child unlocked. The craze was born from a small experiment on college students who did a little better on a spatial reasoning test after a dose of bright music. The effect was tiny, and it faded faster than a story on your social app. It was not about babies. It was not about general intelligence. It was about priming a brain to do a specific task for a few minutes. Enter the industry that smelled hope and printed money. States bought CDs for newborns. Parents bought stacks and called it investment. 18. The perpetual motion machine that changed everything. What if I told you the machine that ran forever ran on sandwich calories? Charles Redheffer built cabinets of gears that rattled like promises and charged $1 to witness the end of physics. Crowds filed in, eyes wide, faith primed. A stern engineer named Robert Fulton sniffed the air and noticed the rhythm of the gears wobble like a drunk metronome. He followed the sound through a wall and found the engine. Not gravity, not the ether, not genius, just an elderly helper turning a crank while eating lunch. The cover came off, and so did Redheffer's reputation in a flurry of splinters and laughter. 19. The Priory of Sion has guarded a holy bloodline for centuries. You have heard the whisper that a secret order has been curating the biggest secret in history, an unbroken line tucked behind paintings and puzzles, brilliant men wearing secrecy like cologne. Here is what the clock says when you actually wind it. The so-called Priory of Sion, incorporated as a club in France in the 1950s, with a name recycled from local geography. A man with royal daydreams forged documents that claimed ancient roots and slipped them into a national library, so later writers would trip over them and shout treasure. The papers were fakes, and the genealogy was wishful thinking with calligraphy. 20. General Tso's chicken is an ancient Hunan classic. Ah yes, the sticky takeout icon with a fake passport. Walk into rural Hunan and order it, and you'll get a smile and a shrug. The dish was born for American palates, likely via Taiwanese chefs who tweaked it in New York. Crisp batter, sweet heat, deep fry therapy, plus a borrowed general's name for instant heritage. It spread because it tasted like fireworks and wore authenticity like a velvet cape. The real math is simple. Not ancient, not Hunanese, just brilliant immigrant market reading. The only battlefield was a Friday night kitchen drowning in to-go orders. 21. The Trojan horse was a giant hollow horse. What if I told you the stallion was a poet's special effect? Real sieges used rams, towers, and covered engines that shoved and burned until gates begged for mercy. A horse likely meant a siege machine or a mythic rapper tied to a sea and earthquake god linked with horses. Archaeology doesn't pull horse shells from the dirt, it finds ash, toppled stone, and layers of fire. The moral lands either way. The Greeks didn't win with arts and crafts class, they brought tools, timing, and nerve. The only hollow thing is our need to make a battering ram cute. 22. Medieval people never bathed. You imagine a 1,000-year funk with incense. Reality smells different. Towns ran bathhouses, neighbors soaked, gossiped, did business. Soap from fats and ash was common. Monks had washing rules, linen layers, wicked sweat. Elites loved scented waters, and Islamic bath culture flowed into Europe via Iberia. Then plague and preachers chilled things. Open pores drink disease. Mixed baths look immoral. Laws target brothels hiding in steam. Public bathing waned in waves, but washing never vanished. The myth flatters our era. The truth, cleanliness was negotiated by class, climate, faith, and fear. 23. Life expectancy was 30, so everyone died young. Catchy and mostly wrong. The average was dragged underwater by brutal infant mortality. Drop a boulder on one side of the boat and the mean sinks. Survive childhood and your odds of 60 or 70 weren't bad for the time. Cemeteries have plenty of old bones. Wills list grandchildren. Skeletons show decades of wear. Risks were real: childbirth, infection, famine, war. But elders existed and toddlers still ignored them. The number survives because it shocks. The truth, 30 wasn't an expiration date. It was a statistical mirage wearing a funeral veil. 24. The Spanish Inquisition tortured without limits. The legend is smoke and hooded silhouettes. The record is bureaucracy with teeth. Yes, repression. Yes, fear. But torture sat under rules. Time caps, doctors present, confessions needing confirmation. Secular courts often hit harder and more often. Many cases ended in penance or fines, not pyres. Executions happened, but not at movie trailer rates. None of this absolves, it calibrates. Rivals with printing presses weaponized the brand. The monster wasn't an endless rack. It was paperwork, procedure, and power deciding what you were allowed to believe. 25. Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Great meme, impossible scene. The violin didn't exist. Sources placed Nero outside the city at the start. He returned, opened buildings, funded shelter, organized grain. Later, hostile writers repainted him singing as flames danced, revenge with a chorus. He did scapegoat a new sect, and that footnote bled. What survives is the insult, not the ledger. Moral: crisis managers rarely get ballads, enemies get legends. The fiddle is a prop. The fire was real. Truth lives in grain accounts and ash counts, not in a soundtrack. 26. Abner Doubleday invented baseball. Patriotic, tidy, false. A commission hungry for a purely American origin crowned a Civil War hero after the fact. Meanwhile, bat and ball games thrived on both sides of the Atlantic. Rounders, town ball. New York clubs formalized rules in the 1840s. Cartwright helped codify baselines, fouls, and 3 strikes. Newspapers argued the details. Doubleday neither wrote the rules nor claimed the throne. The sport evolved. It wasn't immaculately conceived. The myth is a shiny cap. The truth is a scuffed glove that actually fits. 27. The Earth is flat again because videos say so. A debate that's really a trust fall with bad optics. Horizons look flat because Earth is big. Wide-angle lenses lie for a living. Meanwhile, ships still vanish hull first. Stars swap with latitude. Southern flights make sense only on a sphere. Eclipses hit on schedules a disk can't salvage. Surveyors correct for curvature. Satellites sit where the math says they must. Recreate Eratosthenes with 2 sticks and noon shadows, and the planet answers you roundly. Videos can be sincere. Geometry is sincere and right. 28. William Tell shot the apple and birthed a nation. You have heard the scene in your bones. A tyrant points at a child. A father raises a crossbow. The arrow hums. The fruit splits. The people rise. It is the perfect seed for a national story. Perfection is a warning sign. The earliest accounts show up long after the alleged day. Similar tales live in other countries where archers are tested by cruel men and answer with steel. That kind of echo usually means folklore, not transcript. Switzerland did fight for rights and stitched a confederation out of fierce valleys and stubborn towns. That truth does not need a single man with perfect aim. It needs memory of oaths, fairs, taxes, and skirmishes. 29. Banzai charges were pure suicide by fanatic faith. Ah yes, the newsreel clip, a wave of soldiers running straight into bullets to honor an emperor. It says more about the camera than the field. Japanese units did launch massed assaults with shouted cries. Those attacks were not Plan A. They were the last card after ammunition thinned, positions cracked, and the map turned red. Commanders faced a short menu: be pounded into fragments by artillery, be starved in a pocket, be overrun piecemeal in the dark, or gather what remained and try to smash a hole to disrupt and rattle the enemy while there was still breath to do it. Sometimes the charge inflicted real damage. 30. A duel began when a gentleman threw a glove. You have seen the gesture in 100 dramas. A smooth toss, a sharp insult, pistols at noon. The real beginning looked less theatrical and more bureaucratic. An angry man spoke to a trusted friend called a second. The second carried a letter to the other party. The other party named a second of his own. 2 adults then negotiated like lawyers who brought tailored jackets and pocket watches instead of billable hours. They tried to settle the insult with apologies or wording that allowed both men to step back with minimum smoke. 31. They burned the Salem witches at the stake. Ah yes, the bonfire postcard. Salem did not burn witches. Massachusetts hanged 19 in 1692 to 1693, and Giles Corey was pressed to death for refusing to plead. Burning was a European habit under different laws. Puritan New England used juries, indictments, gallows, and the nonsense of spectral testimony. The flame image sticks because cinema loves fire, and the word witch drags continental nightmares. The truth is colder: a courtroom with bad evidence, a jail in winter, a hill with a beam. Panic wearing paperwork. 32. Napoleon was tiny. Little man jokes meet big math errors. Height was logged in old French feet and mistranslated into modern inches, shrinking the emperor by accident. Convert correctly, and you get roughly 1.68 meters to 1.70 meters, average for his time and dwarfed only by his very tall guards. British cartoons miniaturized him, and the nickname Little Corporal did the rest. He did not tower physically. He towered in logistics, artillery, and speed, the unglamorous gears that moved maps. 33. Einstein failed math. The cafeteria comfort myth collapses on contact. As a teen, he self-studied advanced topics and chewed through calculus early. He did stumble on an entrance exam, but in language and botany, not equations. Later, Swiss grading flipped numbers and birthed translation chaos that looked like failure. Legends love errors that flatter laziness. The truth is better. He excelled where it mattered, worked hard on what he lacked, and built tools when none existed. Drop the meme. Keep the pencil. 34. New York has albino alligators in the sewers. The city under the city begs for monsters, but sewers are cold, caustic, and protein poor. Sun-loving reptiles do not found dynasties in chlorine country. Yes, a few small dumped pets have been found topside or in basements, and then winter ended the fairy tale. Sanitation crews spend careers below and have never filed a gator census. The myth survives because it is fun to blame decay on scales. The truth is pipes, grit, roaches, and that phone you swear you did not drop. 35. A Message to Garcia is the gospel of initiative. Boardrooms and boot camps adore the parable of the perfect courier who asks no questions. The essay was dashed off to fill space and accidentally became a management scripture. The real lieutenant, Rowan, got help, and his trek was teamwork, not teleportation. The story flatters bosses by treating curiosity as sabotage. Real initiative is not silence. It is asking the right questions fast, recruiting allies, adapting when maps lie. Bring the message, yes, but also bring a brain. 36. Elementary. My dear Watson. You can hear the line even if you have never opened the book, which is the giveaway. Doyle never wrote that exact phrase. Holmes says elementary and he says my dear Watson, but never in that order. Stage and screen married them into a neat verbal logo, then repetition glued it to the character until it felt canonical. We kept the sticker and forgot the scene. The real proof was mud on a boot, ash on a sleeve, chemicals in a dish, and a silence that made you think. 37. The Curse of Tutankhamun. Whisper it with the lights low. Open the tomb, meet doom. The headline was born when Lord Carnarvon died months after the discovery from an infected mosquito bite that became septicemia after a shaved neck. Reporters then strung unrelated deaths onto the necklace. Most expedition members lived for years, and Howard Carter lived 17 more. Sealed tombs can harbor spores and nasty dust, but malevolent pharaohs are not on duty. The curse was copy. Archaeology was work. 38. Ponce de Leon hunted a fountain of youth. Picture an old conquistador ladling immortality from a Florida spring. Primary accounts do not. They list gold, land, and advantage, the usual colonial shopping list. The fountain motif bloomed in later rival narratives that turned an adversary into a fool. Florida sold myths and routes, not magic water. The truth is uglier and common. He was a professional of empire in an age when empire was a trade. The fountain is branding. The conquest, sadly, was real. 39. Viking helmets with horns. The world's favorite cosplay fails basic field tests. No solid archaeological evidence shows horned helmets used in combat. The silhouette was invented centuries later by romantic artists and opera designers who needed a logo visible from the cheap seats. Real warriors prized balance, vision, and not getting snagged like a walking coat rack. Horns are great for posters and souvenir mugs. For raiding in tight spaces, choose a plain steel cap and a plan. 40. The Old West was pure chaos with zero gun control. The vibe says no rules and all pistols until a heroic jawline rides in. Town records say otherwise. Boomtowns posted ordinances at the edge of town and made visitors check weapons with the marshal. Dodge City and Tombstone literally hung signs. Courts met, juries sat, fines landed, jails filled. Violence existed, but mostly as ambushes, brawls, and feuds, not choreographed showdowns at noon. Dime novels and movies needed danger on every page. City councils needed peace to make payroll. Ask for receipts. If you want more sharp history and jokes that owe nothing to legends, hit like, drop a comment with the myth you want me to tackle next, and subscribe so you do not miss the next episode.